a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is going to be taking place in January. And we're live now, by the way. So they're watching us out there on the internets. Okay, so let me just say hi to everybody. So, here, give me 1 second. Let me punch up YouTube really quickly. And where are we at? Let's see. Let's just go. Let's go here. Let's go to my channel. See what happens. Let's see if we're streaming on this channel. FARcast. Yeah, we're live right there. Okay, so it's not on my normal channel, but it's good enough for us, right? Okay. So let me exit full screen. Let me go back here and get out of this.
Will you be able to go back and see this?
Absolutely. Yeah. And let me get rid of FARcast. We don't need that now. All right. So what I'm going to talk about, I'll just leave this up for now, is these series of eclipses that are coming. And eclipses are very kind of powerful cultural, social augurs, and they give us insight into where the energy is theoretically being eclipsed, right? And it's a really interesting time, especially with the solar eclipse, when we're dealing with the shadow that's cast across the sun. And it does two things. Number one, it eclipses the light. And theoretically, there's a period or phase of darkness, and eclipses used to freak cultures out. Like back, before people could kind of rationalize and deal with the nature of the eclipse, it kind of freaked them out a little bit. So what happened over time is that people were able to understand that not everybody's going to perish or die or have something catastrophic when an eclipse takes place. But they are energetic events, and they do last roughly about 6 months. So that's why I'm looking at tonight the eclipse that's going to start and take place on the 25th of December, which is the Christmas eclipse. And then the following eclipse, well, it's not the following, but it's the next lunar eclipse after that. And that's going to be on July 5th. And that's a really specific day, an important day, because that's the sun, or the birthday, or the solar return of the United States. Right? So these eclipses are pretty impactful and pretty important in terms of where we are, culturally, politically, socially, and the personal. So when there's an eclipse of the light, that also means that we have a very different relationship with what we're seeing. So there's no shadows that are cast during an eclipse. But what happens is, this is what I think. That I think that there's a lot of clarity that can actually happen in an eclipse, especially if it's coupled with some kind of a crisis. There can be a great amount of clarity during that time. So I just want to give you kind of a big overview, kind of the big picture. And how many have heard of the term the fourth turning? Does anybody know about the fourth turning? Okay. So it's a really interesting. It's a book that came out a few years ago, and it talks about cycles within cycles. And there are these turnings that take place, and they're pretty much connected to generational time cycles. And we could almost make some, I wouldn't say assumptions, but connections between generational time cycles in relationship to the planet Pluto. We'll try to make that now, but I want to talk about where we are in terms of the fourth turning. So these turnings go all the way back to, in this country, to the Revolutionary War, Civil War, emancipation, and then, of course, rebuilding of the country. And the area that we really want to focus on is the period from World War I to where we are now, World War II to where we are now. Okay, so the first turning of this century, in a significant way, starts in World War World War II. And what that represents is that's the time of the hero. And we have Audie Murphy, and we have John Wayne, and it's a very heroic kind of representation of the Western male, the American male, and it's a very powerful time in terms of culture. We have sports heroes that are beginning to dot the landscape, whether it's basketball or football or baseball. It's really the rise of professional sports as well. Hollywood begins to take off, right? And we have people, like I said, like John Wayne and Audie Murphy and Glenn Ford and Gary Cooper. It's the time of the hero. And this phase lasts basically from the time that the Americans come home from the theater of Europe in World War II to the 1960s. And the 1960s represent another turning. So if we wanted to kind of go back to World War II, the men that populated that kind of post-World War II era were generally born under the sign of Pluto and Cancer. So they're very connected to things like values. Cancer is a sign that's connected to values, the home, hearth, building, repairing, growing, very nurturing. So you have these men and women too, but it's mostly men during that time. And they emerge from that period because they're born with Pluto and Cancer, and they're very much connected to this country because this country is what? A Cancerian country. So all those values that are baked in, theoretically, to the United States chart really get promulgated and they get mediafied, promoted. So then we move forward. Now, during that time, when John Wayne and Audie Murphy and the sports heroes are dotting the American landscape, we have kids that are being born. And that's the Pluto and Leo generation, also known as the baby boomers, which many of you in this room happen to be. Now, the baby boomers represent or will represent the second turning. And the second turning is the moving away from the hero to the artist. So we're moving away from that kind of heroic impulse, and the artist begins to question society, begins to look at what's happening with the world, with our culture, and that's actually the birth of the anti-hero. You know, that we have a whole different kind of representation of what it is to be a hero, like Steve McQueen, Clint Eastwood, Paul Newman, James Coburn, people like that. Rock and roll really starts to take shape, and people are growing long hair, and the epitome of that is probably Easy Rider, right? With Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper, the true anti-heroes, kind of cruising across the American landscape. So then after that, we move into another phase, and this is really kind of the peak of American, theoretically, the peak of American culture. And it is the time of the mediator. It's the time where there's this interesting balance, but we're at the peak, and that's around the Reaganomics era. Okay, so we're really beginning to disseminate and begin to split off. It's also connected to the nomad. It's another kind of representation of that period where people are searching, they're looking for things. We have the human potential movement, which is a part of that period. Things like Scientology, and Esalen, those become really, really popular kinds of, people are searching. They're searching for their place inside of their bodies, their spirits. They're even searching for new land, new places to live. Migration waves are taking place. People are moving out of the cities. They're moving more into the suburbs, urban flight, white flight, things like that. So it's the time of the nomad, but it's also this concrescence of American culture. And we're at our theoretical military might, of course with Reagan, Star Wars, all that stuff. And then we're also at, in some ways, our economic height as well, with Reaganomics, trickle-down, economic theory, all that stuff. And that manifests in sort of greed is good, right? Gordon Gekko, we have Michael Milken and people ripping off junk bonds. And so that's, let's say, the fat of the land. That's what's happening during that time. And then now we're in another phase. Right? So if we go back and look at this in terms of seasonal cycles, we look at the time of the hero as being springtime. Everything's fresh, everything's new products, new technology. It's all ripe, right? And then we move into the next phase, which is the time of the artist, which, by the way, coincides with what we call the summer of love. And it's the summer of the fourth turning. And then when we get into the time of the nomad or the time of the wanderer, where people are searching, and the values that started off during the time of the hero, they're not as baked in, they're not as intrinsic anymore. That's the fall, and that's also representative of the season of harvest, and we're at our peak here in this country. We're at our peak economically, militarily, and then what comes after the fall? It's the winter. So we are now, that is the fourth turning. And we are in the winter of America right now. And when we get into the winter of America, we are moving into the time of the sage, which would sound quite nice to, I think, a lot of you baby boomers, right? Because you guys get to practice and teach, hopefully, the wisdom and the things that you've learned over the course of your lifetime. That's the way the life cycles work. Unfortunately, ever since Tavistock got into the game, it's all about youth culture, and it keeps getting younger and younger and younger. So even if right now, if you're a millennial, which was, you were the shit if you were a millennial 5, 6, 7 years ago, but the oldest millennials now are 35. So they're moving into being 40 years old. So millennials, like people like Katy Perry, they're marching towards middle age right now. And there's another focus and another emphasis on a much younger generation, which I'll touch on a little bit. So we are in the time of the sage. This is winter in America, and this is the seed time. This is the seed time. So we will have another turning. We will have a new spring in this country. And unfortunately, I don't want to always be America-centric. There's a lot going on out in the world, and some really cool things are happening in other places, and some not so cool things happening in other places. But for the 20th century, this country has been the heartbeat of the planet, economically, culturally, in a lot of ways. So where America goes in a certain direction, it's going to have a domino effect on the rest of the world. We'll talk a little bit about that, particularly economically, because that's going to be some big changes happening, and we'll be looking at that with eclipses. So we're in the seed time now, and it's not easy to get things done during the seed time. It is not. Now, we have two forces that are trying to establish themselves astrologically, and it's been going on for a while now, but for the past year and a half, it's been very, very dominant. And let me bring up a chart, and I'll show you guys. Let's go to, I'm going to bring this up, all these folders. Let's see.
Around what year does the winter end?
I'll get into that. We're not close. We're not close. So if you can see this, you'll see that this is, aspect ratio is a little weird, but you get see, this is really how the Earth is. It's an egg. It's not a perfect circle, right? This is kind of a joke. But this is something that the flat earthers and maybe the globers can deal with. All right, so this is actually the eclipse that's going to be taking place right there. So it's December. It's the Christmas eclipse, and what we've been dealing with is typified by this symbol, which is what's called the true node. Right, this is the true node right here. And this is the south node down here. And these nodes are very, very important. They're very important. They're very, very specific. The nodes are the ascending and descending plane of the moon. And I work a lot with the nodes. They're very important in Vedic astrology as well. Super, super important in Vedic astrology. This is also known as the dragon's head and the dragon's tail. So everybody has a true node in their chart, and everybody's got a south node in their chart. And what I preach with astrology is you want to hang out where your true node is in your chart in this lifetime. If you do that, your life will get markedly easier, okay? What you don't want to do is you don't want to hang out on your south node because it's a been there, done that experience. And there are people who are past life people, right? Who believes in past lives here? I believe in past lives. So did Patton, by the way. So there are people who believe that the south node represents a past life, previous incarnation. We've already done that. The true node is where you want to go in this lifetime. Now, this makes sense because if this is the dragon's head and this is the dragon's tail, you don't put the tail before the head, do you? If you're on a horse, you don't ride it backwards. So this is where your emphasis is in this lifetime, the true node. And this lasts roughly about 17 and a half months, and it changes signs, and it's the only aspect in the chart that actually moves clockwise. Everything else moves counterclockwise. So for let's see, roughly the past year, a little over the past year, we have moved into the true node in Cancer and the south node in Capricorn. All right? It's very important to remember because these are the opposing forces that we're dealing with right now. And sometimes they can look a certain way to one group and they can look another way to another group. But there are the variables do have some universal standard. How they're interpreted is a bit different. Okay. Now, one of the things that happened right after the nodes changed, two major things happened. One, I believe it was Cuomo in New York signed a bill that allowed you to have an abortion up until what, 8 months, 9 months, very late term abortion. So we're dealing with Cancer, which is the mother, and things that have to do with gestation and birth. Capricorn represents the government. Represents the government, the patriarchy. It represents insurance companies, big business. Capricorn is this realm that we're living in. It represents this matrix. Okay, they're both feminine signs, but Capricorn tends to be a bit more masculine. Of all the feminine signs, Capricorn and Scorpio tend to be more masculine. Pisces, Cancer, Virgo, Taurus, they tend to be a bit more feminine. So right after that happened, just a few days after that, good old Ralph Northam down in Virginia was talking about how you'd be able to take a baby after it was born and treat it very nicely, but, you'd be able to terminate the birth of the child. Right? So here we have, and what happened? Scorched earth on that guy, right? I mean, right after he brings that out, anybody know what happened after that? Yeah, he was in blackface. And there were 2 photos of him in blackface. So here we have this very interesting relationship between the nodes. And down here, this is kryptonite. The south node is kryptonite. In the personal chart, I like to think of this as a leech field. You don't want to be around your leech field. If this is the dragon's head, what does a head do? Consumes, right? Yeah, what comes out down here? Shit. You don't want to hang around your shit. You want to go to where you want to consume. So what happened was we had some very political shit that we had to deal with. And there was a lot of controversy during that time. But it happened right when the nodes changed. Right when they changed. Very significant. And there are significant markers with these nodes. If you go back to when the true node was in Leo, and then the south node was in Aquarius, this is when the censorship of the internet began to take place, with the south node in Aquarius. Well, why is that? There's a guy named Alex Jones. Everybody know who Alex Jones is? Okay, Alex Jones is an Aquarius. So he was going through all of what he was going through because the south node was in conjunction with his sun. So he was in an incredibly vulnerable place. Meanwhile, on the other side over here, his best buddy, Joe Rogan. Anybody know Joe Rogan?
Yeah.
What sign is Joe Rogan? What do you think? He's a Leo. So as Alex is going down, what's Joe Rogan doing? He's going up. Up, right? And interestingly enough, Joe Rogan and Alex Jones are born exactly half a year apart from each other. Alex is 11 degrees Aquarius and Joe is 11 degrees Leo. So this gives you some idea as to how the nodes work. They're very vital. They're super important. So what we have now is we have this really interesting kind of tug of war and dogfight going on with these values that represent things like birth and the land and nurturing and caring and the feminine or the masculine that can come in and repair and rebuild. These are really, really, really important energies. But down here, we have not just the South Node, but we have Saturn and Pluto all in the sign of Capricorn as well. So this is really kind of a big deal, right? So we have the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Saturn's been in Capricorn since the end of 2017. In fact, Saturn went into Capricorn, I believe, on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve in 2017, right after the winter solstice. It was like one of the few times in recorded history that I know of that Saturn changed signs, and we were also changing the sun sign and then moving into the winter solstice. It's a very big deal. Super, super big deal. And we've been in Saturn and Capricorn since then. Now, if we want to go back to 2009, that's when Pluto went into Capricorn. What happened in 2009? Financial crisis, right? The financial crisis happened in 2009. And it was almost like a metronome, right on time. So Capricorn rules government, correct? What did the government do during the financial crisis? Well, it didn't listen to you, right? Because most people didn't want bailed out. They did not want the lenders and Bear Stearns and Solomon Brothers. They didn't want them bailed out. In fact, it took a couple of meetings and Ben Bernanke threatening martial law for them to get that signed off on, right? But then what happened after that is that the government got involved in the business of business. It's always been in the business of business, but it was really up front. So the government bails out Bear Stearns, Solomon Brothers, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. It also bought Chrysler. Like for a brief period of time, the United States government owned Chrysler, right? So here we have the merging of government and business. Does anybody know what the other definition of government and business is? Fascism. Thank you. Now, we're still in that phase, but we're in a different phase now. That was when the government said, we're going to get in the business of business. And some of that was like massively and miserably failed business. Who remembers Solyndra? Right?
How about General Motors?
General Motors. That's exactly what I was talking about. But General Motors, they were able to buy their stuff back from the government.
Oh, did they?
Absolutely. So they're theoretically back on their feet again. But Solyndra was a solar plant in California.
500 million or something.
Huge. And they knew that they could not compete with the Chinese. Chinese made the glass tubes cheaper, faster. They could not compete. But it was basically a sleight of hand Ponzi scheme. Okay, that's what happened. But that's another example of the government being involved in business.
Well, they were pushing the green shit.
They're still pushing it, but back then it was egregious. Yeah. Totally egregious. Yeah. And that took place at the former NUMMI factory, which is formerly the GM factory. I grew up there. So they shut down all those businesses and they brought Solyndra in. Does anybody know who owns that building, who owns the property around that building? It's Dianne Feinstein.
Oh, that's why
yeah, absolutely. Dianne Feinstein. Yeah, and Dianne Feinstein was very involved in not just the land, but the staffing and all the things that went along with it. Like, super hands-on. Okay, so we're at a place now, again, because Saturn and Pluto are getting closer and closer together, right? And if we know that Saturn in Capricorn represents the government, or represents the kind of the oligarchy, the patriarchy, it represents this domain. time, space, the physical matrix. And we have Pluto here, which represents deep cultural transformation. So we're now dealing with another iteration of government and business coming together. But instead of the government saying, hey, we're going to go over here, we're going to buy these businesses, now the businesses and the corporations are in the business of governing us.
Right, the corporatocracy.
It is so, and this is beautiful because we're seeing this like really clearly now. The veils are getting very thin. If you have eyes to see, right? If your third eye is remotely open and your heart is remotely open, you can see the game going on right now. So who knows? Who's heard about Nike, LeBron James, China? Okay? So guess what sign LeBron James is? Capricorn. Capricorn. So what happened was is that there's a guy named Daryl Morey. He's a general manager for the Houston Rockets. Very innocuous tweet supporting what's going on in Hong Kong. Which, by the way, is there's some shady stuff going on in Hong Kong, but that's a different discussion. But he's supporting them, right? And then what happened was is that the Chinese government said, we don't like that. We're not taking kindly to that. And they started to punish the NBA. They're starting to punish the NBA. And LeBron James came in and said, well, he didn't know what he was talking about. Nike, China, and the NBA, they're all tied together. They're all tied together. So now what is LeBron James, basically a puppet on a string, saying? You've got to watch what you say. So now we have China beginning to dictate, theoretically, our being able to speak freely. And it's been a huge flashpoint. So what we're seeing now, it's not just our government or corporations being involved in governance, but it's also foreign governments as well, right? Now, recently there was a summit that was held about 2 months ago, and it was I think it was around 183 of the top 200 corporations on the planet. And what they agreed upon, theoretically, and these are big corporations, Bechtel, Fluor, Microsoft, and what they agreed upon is they were going to put people before profits, right? When was the last time a corporation put anybody before their profit? Well, they'll do it because what they're trying to do is they're trying to have a sea change, and that they will want to be the voice of the new governments. So they want to appear to be receptive. They want to appear to be open to the kind of the new social justice agenda, right? And it's very interesting if you watch State Farm. State Farm is a new series of commercials where it's like, do 100 acts of kindness. So that you'll see this commercial. So now what they're doing is they're really getting their mind share into this kind of place of morality, philosophy, and being able to insert themselves in our daily life. And they've always done this through advertising, but it's different now. It's like, here's what you're going to do. You're going to buy our product, you're going to invest in our company, and we're going to advocate that you have some kind of social or moral good involved. Now, that flips both ways. If you have something that, let's say, for instance, a corporation doesn't like what you're doing, they can cut you out, they can cut you off.
What about control?
Control. And you get into companies like PayPal and banks. I was having a conversation with the guy across the street at the health food store today. Very interesting, cool guy. And I was talking about PayPal, and he loves PayPal, whatever. And I was talking about this death metal label. Death metal is like very intense, very hard, screechy, satanic stuff, right? And this death metal label got shut out by PayPal, and then the bank said, you can't do business with us anymore because your music is theoretically something that we don't agree with. And he was summarily moved out of all these opportunities for him to transact. Now, whether or not you agree with death metal, that's a whole other thing. But now we have businesses that are making morally based decisions based on who can transact or not. You see, there's a massive potential for a power grab that's happening right now. Very significant, super significant. But with the south node here, there are pitfalls to this. And every time, let's say, somebody like LeBron says something, what we're seeing is we're seeing the revelation. Because remember, this is the vulnerable part, that south node. We're seeing behind the veil. If you have eyes to see, if your pineal gland is switched on remotely in heart, you can follow the game right now. You can and it's very complex. There's lots of layers here. I was talking with Honey earlier today, and there's a really, really big push here in this town around water. Cancer, right? Water. It's a big deal. And what they're doing is they're having to go up against a corporation, right? You have to go up against a corporation who is embedded with the government, and these people are waking up here. They're saying our water is being threatened, it's being jeopardized, there's fracking going on. So to the best of their ability, they're in that, it looks very naked up there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of alone.
Like a single.
It's kind of alone. This is going to be part of what we're going to be dealing with this eclipse. Because these values, which we hold to be sacred and true, and these are really fundamental organic values. You know, water you can drink, clean water you can drink, land that you can grow on, your own land, right? Cancer represents the things that you own. What does Capricorn represent? The things other entities own. Okay? That's right.
Religion.
That's right.
Also like taking your money.
Right. These are the exactly. So what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with a moment in time from starting with this eclipse. And now remember, the energy of the eclipse is it's 6 months after the eclipse, but there's a run up about 2.5 weeks before that eclipse where things can get very intense, and 2.5 weeks after. Now, I'm not a fear monger with eclipses. I've had eclipses where nothing's happened, and it's been great. And I've had eclipses where things have happened, and I've seen it with people in their lives. One of my favorite stories of an eclipse was one a client of mine, and she has her rising sign at Leo 28. And the Great American Eclipse, which happened in 2017 on August 21st, happened right on her ascendant. And I'm thinking, and I got to my first day I had her as a client, like, what happened to you during the eclipse? I said, oh, nothing, just another day. But then as I got to know her and I got to understand her life, most of her adult life was an eclipse. Like, she'd gone through a very heavy period of darkness. She lost her family, she lost her job, she had to go into rehab. You know, she went into a home for other women. You know, she's fine, she's doing great now. But she already went through that eclipse moment in her life. So when that happened, you know, that was nothing. It was nothing. But this is a very interesting, if we just look at the chart, right? We look at the chart and we just read that energy, it's naked. It's alone. At the top. And these are the values that fundamentally, I think we'd all agree upon fundamentally. Now, how they look from a big picture standpoint, we may not always agree. Right? Some may see the world as, this great conflagration of carbon and climate catastrophe. And other people may not see it that way. But other people may say, well, we got chemtrails in our sky, we got GMOs in our crops, and we've got some really heavy adjuvants in our vaccines. And so we've got a different version of this, right? It'd be great if we could all get on the same page, wouldn't it? But it's very, very difficult. And why is it difficult? Because we're dealing with cycles. We're dealing with astrological cycles. And they're not always easy to predict. I want to bring your attention to another astrological cycle. And it's right here, and it's Uranus and Taurus. And Uranus, it's nascent. It's really kind of been around. About 1.5 years ago, it started off from Aries to Taurus, went back into Aries, and now it's in Taurus again. And it's in Taurus to stay, and it's going to be here for another, 6.5 years, almost 7 years, right? Now, Uranus is in its fall in Taurus. So when we think of Taurus, we think of feminine energy, we think of the earth, we think of money, we think of hard resources. That's Taurus. With Uranus, what do we get? We get revolutionary and we get radical. That's the nature. And this is what we get with Uranus and Taurus. Pop up for me. Right here. So this is Extinction Rebellion. You guys know about this? It is a worldwide movement, but they don't really care about chemtrails so much. They have a very different kind of agenda. What's really interesting here, this is so Uranus and Taurus, right? We can't eat money because we associate Taurus with money. This is supposed to be an hourglass, right? Like we're running out of time. It's also a rune, which is breakthrough, right? It's Dagaz. This is the rune of breakthrough. But instead of having it on its side, where it's a breakthrough, what they've done is they've basically kind of hijacked the energy around this. And we're in a point of stasis here. It's also as above, so below. This is the masculine moving up. This is the feminine moving down. But if they really wanted to unlock this, they would turn that symbol on its side. They did the same thing with the peace symbol, by the way. Do you know that? So the peace symbol is a rune, and it's called Awaz, and it looks like this, right? It looks like that. And what it is, it's like deer antlers. And so back in the olden days, with the Vikings, where the runes come from, they would use deer antlers for protection. They would use them for protection. They'd put them on their carts or their heads. But so it means protection. That's what Awaz represents. But what they did with the peace symbol is they turned it upside down. And it becomes the broken cross, which means there is no protection. It's the rune inverted. So symbols play a really large role in how we interpret reality. And so what we have here is we have Dagaz, which is breakthrough. Right? No, this is Dagaz is light. And that's this is Dagaz. My bad. And so it's inverted. It's also kind of interesting. I think it's the symbol for the Green Lantern too, if I'm not mistaken. But what we're dealing with here, right? Invest in our children's future. It's all very vague. What we're dealing with here is we're dealing with Uranus and Taurus. We're dealing with the radicalization, right, of values that are associated with the earth. It doesn't always mean it's right. Doesn't always mean it's right. It means that what we're dealing with is we're dealing with an astrological cycle, and again, Taurus, Uranus and Taurus, is in its fall. It's in its fall. Now, what's interesting is there is a group of people who have Uranus in Scorpio, and they're kind of the late Gen Xers. They're the late Gen Xers. And so they're going through a very interesting time because Uranus is actually exalted in Scorpio. So they're having an opposition. And these are people that are going to be born, right around, let's see, it would be early 70s.
Yeah.
Early 70s.
I was just talking about my kids, 73 and 74.
Yeah, so they're going through an interesting. Yeah, they're going through an interesting time.
Right.
Yeah, and it could be a real opening for them. It
opens your eyes.
Yeah.
In both cases. Yeah.
So we just came out of a Uranus and Aries period for 7 years. Aries represents the self and the individual. So during that 7-year period, which started off, interestingly enough, on right around March 11th, 2011. Anybody know what happened then? Fukushima. So we had a major shift between two outer planets, Neptune and Uranus. They both moved right around Fukushima. One within weeks and the other within about a month and a half. Significantly enough.
They moved in different signs.
That's right. We went from Neptune went from Aquarius to Pisces, and then Uranus went from Pisces to Aries. Okay? So now, during those 7 years, from 2011 to roughly 2018, right? What did we see? We saw the radicalization of the self and the individual. And everybody was trying to get a seat at the table. You know, LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter, Make America Great Again. You know, everybody wanted to have their voice heard. So we have the radicalization of the individual taking place. It was also masculine radicalization in a lot of ways. So what happened in 2016? We elected a male president, right? Male president. And Trump, whether you like him or not, whether you believe in him or not, he is radical. He's radical for the time. And he has a Sun-Uranus conjunction in his chart, which makes him unpredictable in a lot of ways. Very interesting. Like I find Trump to be, a lot of people grind their teeth. I find Trump to be absolutely fascinating. Because when he says we're going to get our troops out of Syria, right? What happens? You have Lindsey Graham, you have the dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, and who are deeply tied to the military-industrial complex. They go after him, right? And then on the left, which is supposed to be the anti-war party, what do? Well, they're like, oh, you got to stay over there. You got to be in war, right? Oh, well, we thought you were the anti-war party.
They were.
Yeah. Now, Cortez, to her credit, is actually behind the president. You know, of course, she's kind of breaking ranks in a lot of ways, right? But he's radical in that way. He will throw a bomb in the middle of the road and see what happens with people. It's a very uncomfortable kind. He's a disruptor, and he's part of the fourth wave. He's part of this fourth wave, and there's a disruption cycle that we're going through right now. But he was the radical male, right? So now we're dealing with what? Radical females, correct? We're dealing with people like AOC. We're dealing with where is she? Down here. She's hiding. Come on out. Come on out. Where'd she go? Elizabeth Warren. Oh, she disappeared. It's a sign. She's around here somewhere. I wanted to pop her up. Anyway, Elizabeth Warren, interestingly enough, is Uranus-Sun conjunction, just like Trump. Different sign. Cancer. And she's right at the beginning of Cancer, 0 degrees. So she's born right on the summer solstice, which is, I think, fairly interesting. Right on the summer solstice. I don't think she's going to make it based on timing. Because if the election was held in March, she might win. But it's not held in March. It's going to be in November. And by that time, the nodes will shift. March would be right about here. And that time, the nodes will shift, and they'll be in the sign of what? If it's going from Cancer, it's going Gemini, right? Who's a Gemini? There you go. Do the math. Okay, so I'd be very surprised if he was not elected again. Okay, now a lot of people are talking about Hillary being in the election, coming in at the last minute. It would not be a wise idea for her because she happens to be a Sagittarius rising. All right, that means the South Node, which is the vulnerable part of the chart, will be in her first house. She doesn't want that because that would be revelation. And the South Node will be going through her 8th house, which is the house of secrets.
Yeah.
The true node will be going through her 8th house, my bad. So it would bring up the house, it would bring up secrets, right? In Gemini, duality. So this would not be a wise move for her on a political level to run for president. It would be too revelatory. It's really, I shared an interesting story with you. So I used to do this newsletter, and I would try to look around and come up with ideas for the newsletter. And I was looking at Hillary Clinton's chart. I'm like, maybe I can do something with Hillary Clinton's chart. Let me look at this. So I started looking at her chart. I'm like, oh, wow. Look where Mars is. It's going into her 8th house. There's a lot of stuff going on in her 8th house. And she has, I think she has Uranus in Gemini, if I'm not mistaken, in her 8th house. Or it's 9th house. 9th house. But it's in Gemini. Anyway, so I'm looking at this. I'm going, okay, what's going on? What's going on here? And I said to myself, she's going to go through some kind of a sex scandal. There's going to be a sex scandal with Hillary Clinton. And I started to write about it. I didn't know how it was going to unfold, but it was going to be sex, right? And like, a week after I did this newsletter, that's when the Wiener pics came out. And who's he married to? Huma Abedin. And it all began to point back to Huma Abedin. She was inseparable with Hillary, so she had to step down. Right? So that's the 8th house. And that gives you kind of an idea of what could happen. It's the house of Scorpio. It's the underworld. It's sex. It's other people's money. So this would not be, I would not advocate her running for president. Bernie's interesting. Bernie's got that Sun Saturn. He's got the Uranus Saturn conjunction in his chart. He's also got Mars. He's got Mars in Aries. Bernie. He's a fighter, right? I'm not a fan of the guy, but he is a fighter. And when I see Mars in Aries, that's somebody. Well, he should have fought a little more in 2016.
I don't think he had a choice.
No, I don't think he did either.
With the DNC again.
No, I don't think he had a choice, but he could have maybe gone independent. A lot of that was the time. Yeah. That was really the time for him. And the true node, I remember being right around Virgo at that time. And if I'm not mistaken, Bernie's a Virgo, right? He's a Virgo.
But he couldn't fight them.
And he's got a Sun-Neptune conjunction in Virgo, which is interesting. Like Sun-Neptune can be very messianic in some ways, but it can also be very undependable. So, and he had kind of both of those things going on during that time, because he was rocking. Bernie Sanders was rocking.
Oh, yeah, he
and then all of a sudden he went into that Neptunian thing, and showed up at the DNC with a black eye. Did you guys see that? He showed up at the big convention. He had a black eye. Like, how did that happen, Bernie? You might have had a knock at the door.
Like the mafia.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know.
Biden. Yeah, that's
Biden. I think Biden's in trouble. He's a Scorpio. He's got a bunch of stuff in the 12th house. He's really hidden. He has a lot of secrets. And if I'm not mistaken, he's kind of an early Scorpio. So Uranus is going to wreak havoc with him in opposition to a lot of his Scorpio planets. So when you get into oppositions, it's this outside force that goes into the other side, and depending upon what that planet is, it begins to bore in and kind of extract what's on the other side of that. So if he has Uranus and Taurus going in, and Scorpio represents a lot of times other people's money, soft assets. And Uranus or Taurus is hard assets, hard money. And this is not a good time for him with the opposition to Scorpio planets. And so a lot of his stuff is over here in the 12th house, which means Uranus is over here in the 6th house, which is also a house that's related to health. And he's got, Uranus tends to be electrical and neurological. And I would say he's probably got electrical and neurological problems. So when you watch him, he has a very hard time finishing his sentences. There are people that believe he had a couple of mini strokes.
Yeah, he had an aneurysm, didn't he?
Yeah. So you can see that with Uranus, 6th house, it's electrical, opposing a lot of his, he's an inside player. His sun is in the 12th house. There's a lot about Joe Biden you don't know about. And that's how 12th house people are.
I know somebody that worked in his office in Delaware.
Yeah.
And the word was he had these aneurysms. I think he had 2. And they said the Joe Biden before the aneurysms was a different person than the one after.
Right.
Because he was really on the ball.
Right.
But they said he's totally different. Nice guy. I mean, they like him.
I mean, I just think politically he's in the wrong time politically. He's dealing with a group of Democrats who swung so far left that they want to burn everything down, right? I mean, some level. Right. And he's way too in the middle. Right. He's too moderate for what's happening. I like Tulsi Gabbard out of the Democrats. Yeah. She's got some kind of weird ties to the Council on Foreign Relations, but she's a straight shooter. But by the way, I don't know if you watched my Sunday night show, but I talked about her and Kamala Harris, and I did their charts, and I'm like, oh man, it's going to be a shootout here.
Yeah,
And I saw it.
And it's all coming.
Yeah, I saw it coming.
Yeah.
And I said she's gonna tear Kamala Harris apart. And when you look at Tulsi Gabbard's chart, she's basically split between Aries and Libra. She's really got a lot of opposition. So all that warrior side to her, that's Aries. And then the Libra side is the peacemaker. So she's trying to bring the two of them together. But I looked at Kamala's chart, I'm like, she's gonna take, and her campaign has not been the same since.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's get into this chart a little bit more because it's a really important chart. So what we have here is, again, this very intense energy around Saturn and Pluto with this very vulnerable backdoor with the South Node in Capricorn. And it feels to me like there's going to be an overcorrection. This is the image that I get here, is an overcorrection. And the overcorrection is for this, which is that true node in Cancer, where people are, guess what? We're waking up. We're waking up to the things that matter to us. Family, home, water. I also believe we might see the beginnings of rumbling in the housing market here as well, because this is representative of homes and housing. Now, what's really interesting is not just what's happening here, but what's happening over here, right? What's happening over here? But what's happening over here is we have the sun and the moon. That's also in the sign of Capricorn, right? And we have Jupiter also in the sign of Capricorn. There's a lot of Capricorn going on. This is what's called the stellium. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any planets more than 3 is called a stellium. So the energy is bigly. But it's bigly in the sense that Capricorn is very dominant. Extremely dominant. So we're looking at either corporations, government, or the combination of a corporation and a government overcorrecting. There's the potential for an overcorrection here. Now, behind it all, we have little Mercury, which is in the sign of Sagittarius. And that's at 25 degrees, which means it's conjunct the galactic center. And it's also on my Jupiter. How about that? So Sagittarius is a sign that is connected to truth. Truth. Authenticity. Right? You're a Sag, right?
Yes.
You tell it like it is. Am I right? Honest up front.
Yes.
So I was fooling around up here, and I said, "Yeah, we're going to take care of this lickety split." And he goes, "Lickety split, huh?" That's a Sagittarian in action. Okay, they're very funny. Some of the funniest people in the zodiac are Sagittarians.
You know the quote? I don't believe in astrology. I'm a Sagittarius, so I'm skeptical.
Right. Jim Morrison does. He says that in one of his live concerts.
Yeah, I don't believe in astrology, but I'm a Sagittarius.
Yeah, so he's like in his concert. He's like,
I think that's so clever.
I'm a Sagittarius, and this gal in the audience says, "Oh, I'm a Sagittarius too. I love Sagittarius." He says, "Yeah, but I don't believe in astrology." It was total Morrison. Anyway, here we have truth, and truth is on an island back here, right? It's on an island. It's by itself. You look down here. What's Mercury doing? Well, let's see. We've got the Saturn. There's nothing really going on with Mercury.
Yeah,
Minor aspect.
Oh, it's going to go retrograde.
And we got the conjunction, but it's a wide conjunction with these planets. Different sign though, right? Then we have a trine with Mercury, and that's with Uranus. So what we have is this little truth teller behind this massive stellium of Capricorn, which means that the truth is available to us during this time, but it is occluded by the events that are taking place. So this would be something along the lines of, can't you see what's going on? Can't you see what's going on? Can't you see what's happening? But there's something else happening here that's much, much bigger. Now, it will catch up, right? So Mercury will go into Capricorn, and it will catch up with the rest of these planets. And will it be disseminated? That's the big question.
Yeah, but it's going retrograde.
From here?
Mercury's going right.
Well, Mercury's going retrograde now, right? It's going to go retrograde on the
When was
first
it
of the
31st?
31st, right? But by this time, it'll be out.
Oh.
Okay, so the next time it goes retrograde is after the first of the year. But this is a very interesting time because this brings in what I've been talking about for a while now is this Jupiter square to Neptune. That's been going. Squares are hard angles,
Yeah.
and things get really weird, right? And so the truth has been very difficult because Jupiter's been squaring Neptune. Neptune is foggy, misty. There's a lot of convolution, and Jupiter in Sagittarius wants to punch through that. It's been very hard to get to the truth for the last six months, roughly, right? Now Jupiter's starting to separate from Neptune, and things are starting to, guess what? Get clearer. So I don't know if anybody caught what happened with the ABC video of the supposed war in Turkey. Do you guys know what happened? So Trump says we're going to pull the troops out, and all of a sudden ABC News does this really big, broadcast, right, about the Kurds are just slaughtering. They're getting slaughtered by the Turks. They got all this firefight, and it's like, wow, man, shit's going down, right, in northern Syria. Turns out that was a video from a night shoot in Kentucky from 2016. And ABC had captured that, used that, and presented that as what was happening in Syria, northern Syria. They didn't apologize for it, right? But it came out. Somebody on the internet figured it out, found out the footage, and brought it to the surface. Why? Jupiter's starting to separate itself from Neptune.
And Jupiter's inside is a skeptic.
That's right. November is a really important month. November's a window. All right? It's a window into the world. It's a window into your own lives. Because we're moving out of Jupiter and Sagittarius, and it's going to conjunct the galactic center in November. We're also going to have the sun there. Venus is going to be there. It's a very Sagittarian time. So what we're looking at here is a massive overcorrection. The truth is not far behind. And what we're trying to get to, theoretically, is balance. This is Libra on the ascendant. And we have the part of fortune here. And what we're trying to figure out, this is the midpoint, is the balance between the needs of, I would say, the individual as it relates to things like water and home and family and all those things. And let's face it, we live in a society where we are surrounded by corporations, and they play a role in our lives. Sometimes they play a good role, like they're delivering, it's a public utility, but probably connected to some corporation somewhere. We have light here, we have power here. They made this computer, they've got this TV. The cars that you were in brought you here, right? So they're a part of our lives, for better or worse. But what we're trying to do is find some balance between what our needs are and what the supposed corporate needs are, or the corporate needs that are now being morphed into kind of a collective need. So this is potential. This is potential here. What we're trying to do is find a balance. We have the cross, right? Part of fortune within the cross. So is there going to be some issues or challenges with money in the coming year? Yes, there will be. If you're following what's happening financially with the repo, the Fed is just pumping billions and billions of dollars into the repo market. And basically, it's just like somebody that's just living on caffeine and steroids. That's what's going on financially. There's also this big push now to move towards what? The gold standard. It's not great, by the way. The gold standard is a time when, if you look at what's happening with, here's gold, look at that, right there, right on time. If you're looking at what's happening with the big financial players, like people like Warren Buffett, he's been in liquidity mode for the last year. And the reason he's in liquidity mode is because they want liquid assets so they can get this. And this moves us off the fiat currency, which we've all been playing with since 1913, sometimes at very exorbitant rates, but it's allowed us to borrow and build and all those things. When we go into the gold standard, if we do go into the gold, there's a very good chance we will, by the way. That means that there is a lockdown on money. And the people that set the rates with the Fed and with fiat lending are now going to set the new terms and conditions. So it's going to be a very interesting time. And I do believe we're headed in this direction. There's another direction we're headed in, and that is non-physical currency. That's also going to be part of the Uranus and Taurus. We can talk a bit about that if you want to. So if you have any kind of capital laying around that you can invest, I would say buy gold and buy silver.
Think about cryptocurrencies.
So we could talk about that. Cryptos are interesting, but you have to get into the right crypto. They want to move us into electronic currency. So here's what I'm seeing. Like if you have, and I'm not saying put all your money into gold and silver, but I'm saying, but if you're watching gold, it's going up, and silver is following along at a kind of a much slower rate. So you want to get on this. Do not get gold certificates. Stay away. You want hard metal. You just want to hedge. You don't want to put everything into it. So the cryptos are interesting. What's going to happen, this is just my estimation. Here's our friend Uranus, since we're talking about it. What's going to happen is that the dollar is going to buy less. Which means that, why? Because food prices, the cost of things is going to go up. It's going to happen. We've already had an absolutely terrible year with our crops. Uranus and Taurus, right? Taurus is the earth. What are we dealing with? Flash floods in the Midwest. Wiped everything out, right? Or a lot of it. I don't know if you've tried to buy celery lately. Have you tried to buy celery? $3 a head, if you can find it. China's having issues. You know, the United States is, you know, the breadbasket of the world. So we're going to be dealing with some of this just because there's going to be scarcity involved. Now, again, where's the true note? It's in cancer. What do you do with cancer? You can things. You know, you can, you dry, you hydrate. I highly recommend you do that now. This is a good time for that. You know, candy is kind of a cool thing. You get to have stuff around. You know, beets or charred tomatoes or whatever you want to do, right? What's going to happen is that the dollar will buy less. That won't go away, but I don't know if you've noticed, but there are a lot of like applications where you get cash back. Cash back. Get, you know, spend here, use this, cash back. So what we're going to be looking at is you're going to have these subscriptions or these services. Well, it'll be like digital coupons, and what they'll do is they will get you. They'll what's the word I'm looking for? They'll lure you into this because you're going to be able to get more by using your phone than by using your dollar. Your phone will help buy you. They'll incentivize you. So there are a number of companies that are setting this up now, and that's the transition for ultimately moving off of physical currency into your phone. That's going to be the first step, right? Facial recognition, it's all built into the phone. But there's a downside. There's a real downside to this, right, with Uranus and Taurus. Because Taurus, it's like your home. Your home is very Taurian. It's your sanctity. Like Cancer represents your emotional space. Taurus represents your physical space. And just recently, in fact, I was talking to Honey about this morning. Anybody know Nest, like Google's Nest? You know, they're hacking Nest now. And they're going into people's homes, and they're talking to people through Nest. And what they're sharing is not pretty. Like they're saying, I'm going to come kidnap that kid, stuff like that, right? So there's a downside to technology, and this is Uranus and Taurus, because it's in its fall. It's not always going to work out the way we think it's going to work out during the next 7 years. So we are moving towards, in my estimation, more of a digital currency. There are going to be a lot of people that resist that, by the way. A lot of people want to be able to buy something and not have it tracked or not be tied to their cell phone. Yeah. More and more of that is kind of, it's going to start to go away. So if you want to have, and this is where I've kind of gone into place things like your own currency for your community. Like if you live in a small town, you can create your own currency. Nobody says you can't. You can figure out ways to do it. You can collateralize it, you can barter, you can trade. It's very creative. You know, we're not really plugged into the system all the time. If you're creative, you can do things outside the system. You know, you could do a barter exchange in this town. And I'm sure some towns are already doing that. But this is going to happen. We're going to stare it down. It's going to happen during Uranus and Taurus. And I think we're going to see the first wave of that during these eclipses. So what I want to do now is I want to move ahead to the next eclipse. You guys okay with this? Okay, just want to make sure I'll keep things moving. Okay, so this is the next eclipse here. And this is happening on July 5th, right? So here, everything's kind of reversed. This is a lunar eclipse. Here we have the moon in Capricorn. And then the sun is in the sign of Cancer, right? So this is the inverse that's happening right around July 5th, right around the United States, birthday of the United States. Okay, before I go here, I got to put the brakes on this really fast. So I want to bring up something else. This is what happens in between, right here. This is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, right? Saturn-Pluto conjunction at 23 degrees. This is what astrologers have been talking about for the last 3 to 4 years. The last time we had Saturn and Pluto in the sign of Capricorn, and then the true node was in Capricorn. You've got to go all the way back to, what was it, like 1585? Is that what it was? It was when the Pied Piper of Hamelin was essentially seducing the children of the village of Hamelin to leave. This is the last time we've had this. The nodes were a bit different. So we're in really new territory here. And how this is going to be defined ultimately, I think is going to be really, really dependent upon what happens with that eclipse. It's not too far away. It's just weeks ahead. So it's kind of like two stages. There's the shot of the eclipse, and then this is the kickback right here with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. 2020 is not going to be an easy year on some level. I'm just telling you right now. It's not going to be an easy year. We're dealing with the 220s, right? Anybody know about Tarot? Major Arcana? Do you know what the 20th card is? It's the Aeon, right?
I mean, I know.
It's the Aeon. The Aeon represents the end of one world and the beginning of another. And we're dealing with that 2 times, double 20. And then number 22, which is a master number. So this is a big year. 2020 is a really, really significant year.
Is that January 20th? Is that what it says?
It is January 20th. There's the 20 again. January 20th, 2020. 20, right?
Look for ice in this area.
What's that?
Ice.
Ice.
Yeah, I remember when Pluto and Uranus were in Capricorn. It was
Right.
the worst winter of my life, 94.
Really?
Yeah. I was in for 6 weeks. But you know, I lived back in the woods with that wood cold. I couldn't even go out.
Right.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of ice this winter, I would say, with Pluto and Saturn.
Oh, that makes sense because the Farmer's Almanac is talking about a very cold winter.
Yeah. No, it's Capricorn. It's Saturn and Capricorn.
It is. It is.
Pluto and Capricorn.
It is.
Uranus and Pluto were conjunct.
That's right.
That was the word 94.
It's the time of winter. Capricorn is the time
Yeah.
of winter. Just remember, we're in the winter of America.
But Saturn has ice rings.
And this is where we become conscious. We become conscious of that. Now, what's interesting is the amount of days between the eclipse in December and the eclipse in July. It's, what is it? It's 192 days, which comes out to the number 12. And I've got a whole thing about 12, which you'll see. Oh, it's really interesting. Anybody know about gematria? Gematria?
Back to numbers.
Yeah. So the Jewish gematria, right? There are two words. I looked this up right at the top of this page for 192. The first one was chart, and the second one was eclipse. Okay, so let's take a little visit here, right? So what we have Uranus. This is during this Saturn-Pluto conjunction. We have Uranus in the 12th house. And the 12th house is a hidden house. This is where we leave the chart. So Uranus in the 12th house is disruptive. And it's coming from a place that we cannot see. So one of the things that is going to be really difficult for people in some ways is to not immediately judge the events that we're going to be seeing in the coming year. Because in many instances, people will jump on it and say, this is happening, this is bad, right? But what I'm seeing here is a much longer term effect that is put into play. And the key here is to not be reactive. It's going to be very tricky. Especially when we get to the election. I'm going to show you the election chart for 2020, and it is not pretty. And I try to deal as much as I can with what I see in the reality based on the patterns and the energy. It is not. We can already feel it, right? On some level, it's already happening. But what we have going on here, try not to judge what is going to take place during this time. There's a long-term effect. It will get worked out eventually. But during this year, it's going to be tricky. And I do believe that we're going to see something we're going to be blindsided. There's a blindside moment that's coming through with Uranus here. And we have Taurus dominating the chart on the ascendant. So again, what are we doing? Physical reality, money, the earth changes, topography. Now, what's also interesting is we have a nice sextile here with Venus. Now, Venus is conjunct Neptune in the sign of Pisces, which is wonderful. It's peaceful, it's loving, it's kind. So there's the potential to have interesting alliances during this time. Like you might find people that may not hang out with each other or agree with each other. They may wind up coming closer together during this time. And it may be out of some sort of necessity. Like, hey, we got to pull together. We got to put our oars in the water. And, I'd like to think we're still humans. And that when there's a catastrophe or a crisis, doesn't matter what your political or your belief system is, right? You say this person needs a hand. And this is what makes us Americans in a lot of ways. This is really what separated us from the rest of the world. And I've heard stories about people in China. Like I was talking to this guy who was in China one time, and he was on a tour bus, and there was a mass flood, flash flood. And there was somebody he was drowning. He was a Chinese guy drowning in the street, and nobody in the bus got out of the bus to help this guy. He's an American. What does he do? He gets out of the bus and pulls this guy out of this flash flood. But they could have cared less. But here we're catching babies out of windows, and that's kind of who we are, and not a bad thing, right? So this would be for me kind of akin to that. This Uranus Venus sextile is during this is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. This is the formation of unique and unusual alliances that are different, right? Now we also have this Mars conjunction with the moon in Sagittarius. And let me tell you right now, that is fire. That is on fire, right? So there's going to be a lot of energy that's going to be connected in to people believing that they are right during this time. There is a lot of self-righteous energy. And you know what? No one side has a copyright on self-righteousness. If somebody feels strongly enough about something, doesn't matter, what color they're wearing, red, blue, or pink, or purple, doesn't really matter. This is really interesting. This reminds me of the line by Yeats in The Second Coming. Does anybody know that poem? The worst are filled with passion and intensity, while the best lack all conviction. Right? That's one of the key lines of The Second Coming. And this is what I get out of this, right? Passion, right? Passion and intensity. And what are Mars and the Moon doing here? Squaring Neptune.
I was just gonna say,
Squaring Neptune.
the collective.
Collective. And when you get into Mars, Neptune squares, guess what we're looking for? We're looking for scapegoats. This is big time scapegoat energy. Everybody's looking around to point a finger. You're at fault, you're at fault, you're at fault. And this is like the assemblage of the high moral ground. Okay? Now that doesn't mean that it doesn't have a role to play. Of course it does. Right? We have a moon sextile to the sun. We have a moon sextile to Mercury. We have a Mars sextile going on here. And it's Aquarius. You got Aquarian and Sagittarian energy together. What do you have? You've got belief systems, you've got righteousness, you've got truth, and Aquarius is everybody. Right? So this is a very interesting moment in time because it has, at the one hand, the potential for galvanization. If we can move out of the way of assigning blame and pointing fingers, we can move into galvanization. So a lot of people think that this Saturn-Pluto conjunction is people. So while this has crisis written here, this is a real crisis point. I don't want to soft sell this, but it's not the end of the world. It's only the end of the world if we wind up assigning blame and we get caught up in that game. My sense here is something is going to blindside us very quickly, and that's Uranus square. Uranus is also squaring the Sun and Mercury. I have a feeling this is also going to be connected to communications and technology. Like, I would not be surprised during this period if we have outages. And there could be things like credit card outages, EBT, things like that. We're already seeing some of that in California, right? With the rolling blackout stuff. But again, what happens when things like that occur? You pull together. Do you remember when Katrina happened? There were people from all over this part of the country going down to New Orleans with fire trucks. How about with Houston? When we had a hurricane in Houston, we had people from New Orleans. We had the Bayou Navy and all that stuff. It didn't matter what color skin you had. You were there. You were part of that whole thing. You were helping out. So remember, a crisis is also an opportunity. And I believe we're looking at the potential for a crisis during this time. All right, but it's not the end of the world. Things will continue to go on. But circle this, right? 20. This period. This is what everybody's talking about. All right. So let me go back over here. That's the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Let's go back to, this is the eclipse. This is the next phase of this. And here we have a whole lot of Aries. And this is called a T-square. And how I'm interpreting this energy is, I'm interpreting this as the beginnings of civil unrest. Because it's all happening around the United States sun. And we have again, what's up here in the 10th house? We have this really dominating force of Capricorn in the 10th house. So it's coming down hard, right, on the rest of the chart. So this is heating up and leading into the summer, which leads us into the election cycle. Now, there are some good things happening here, and other things, going to be on fire. We have a nice Venus trine to Saturn, a trine to Pluto, mostly to Saturn. Cooler heads prevail during this time. This is actually a time where older people that have been through a few things, will actually have some interesting things to offer and share. Uranus is in a very interesting trine with the moon. Uranus is a key player here during this eclipse, sextiling to Mercury and Cancer. So to me, this is inventiveness, right? When you get into Uranus, it's about being inventive, innovative, creative. So it's actually favoring this Cancerian energy, which is around the home and growing, and cancers really can do, right? It's really funny. There's this show. What's it called? It's about these guys that go in and they take these giant snakes out of the swamps in Florida. Have you seen that? It's on the Discovery Channel. Anyway, these guys are interesting, and they've got a term for like inventing stuff or fixing stuff. It's called hucklebuck. So this is hucklebuck right here. And this is a really interesting opening with being creative and innovative, and it feels, again, this is kind of crisis-like with this T-square, and we've got Mars in the 12th house in Aries. Wow. That's kind of intense, right? It's kind of intense. Mars is hanging out in Aries for a very long time this year, and it shows up again in the election. So Mars goes to Aries and Taurus, and then it goes back to Aries again. So my sense here, right around the 4th of July, I'm just giving you the heads up. This is heavy energy. This is very heavy energy. And we have the oligarchs right on top, right? Now, what we have here is the shift of the nodes. We have the node in Sagittarius now, and it's in the south node, which is not favoring dogmatic thought. It is not favoring dogmatic thought. This is, with the true node in Gemini, what we're supposed to do is act quickly. This is not the time for pontification or philosophizing. This is the time for acting quickly, being swift, making moves, right? So how does it affect you on an individual level, right? When you think of something, you want to do something true to Gemini, you move on it. It's direct, right? This is direct. It's not like you're waiting for the word of God. That's the South Node in Sagittarius. Don't wait on the word of God during this period. You want to move. And this is, again, a cycle that's going to last 17 months. So wherever Gemini is showing up in your chart, let's find out where it is. That's where you need to move and make adjustments. Okay? All right, I'm going to bring one more last chart here. And this is the chart for election night, which I have to bring it in. Where is it here? It's the United States chart. Let's see, July 5th election. Okay. This is the night for election. This is the election chart. Okay. So when I first cast this chart, I was not crazy about it. And the reason why is because there aren't, in astrology, the blue lines, they represent angles that are outs. They give you outs. The red lines represent conflict. And we have a major conflict here with Mercury at the final degrees in Libra. By the way, that's the burning path. These degrees are called the burning path. It's very interesting final degrees going into Scorpio. Things get very, very intense. So we have Mercury in Libra squaring Jupiter, Pluto right here in Capricorn. And then here's our friend Mars, again in Aries, right? So Mars is going to play a big role in 2020. Mars is action, it's aggression, it's willpower, and it's going to be between two signs, Aries and Taurus. Moves forward in Aries, goes backwards into Taurus, and goes backwards and hits Aries again. Now think about that. That's martial energy. If it's in a certain part of your chart, which it will be, it could be good for you. Right? Like I've got Mars in my 5th house. Well, it'll be in my 5th house, which is activity and sports and creativity. It could be pretty good for me, right? Just figure out where Mars is going to be in your chart. It's not all bad. But from a collective standpoint, Mars in Aries is aggressive. It's aggressive energy. And this is on election night. And we have a major T-square going on here. Okay? So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I have to bring, I'm just looking at this, right? This is, to me, this is very disruptive and has the potential to be quite violent. And no matter who wins, there will be no winner in this election. There will be no winner. I've been trying to kind of understand this, intuit this, if we're even going to have an election, by the way. Because that Saturn-Pluto conjunction and leading into that lunar eclipse, it's a very intense period, especially that lunar eclipse phase. And it moves us into the quarter of the election, which is the summer. And we have this retrograde energy with Mars, which is like regret. Mars in Aries retrograde is regret. There's some outs. We have a sextile between Mars and the moon, and then Venus and the moon. That's a trine. So there are some things here that are good, but you have to act on them. The dominant energy is here. And even with the sun, we have a Sun-Uranus opposition. The sun is in Scorpio, right? Starting that day off, it's in Scorpio. And Scorpio is intense. It's fixed. It's powerful. But you're also dealing with the shadow, and we're also dealing with Uranus opposing the sun, which is radical. So, will we come out of this? Of course we will. Of course we'll come out of this. But remember, this is a very pivotal year. It's extremely pivotal. And by this time, guess what? Saturn is about to go into Aquarius. And by the time we hit 2021, we're out of Saturn and Capricorn, and we're moving into a new epoch and a new era with Saturn and Aquarius. And those 3 years are going to be very interesting because from a cultural perspective, we are moving out of what I would call the reign of the city-state. We're moving away from that. And we're moving more into an Aquarian kind of reality. It all depends on how that's going to show up. Because there are different versions and different kind of potentialities for that reality to manifest. So it could either be kind of a technocratic, top-down version where everybody is surveilled 24/7. But guess what? You get free shit, right? You just have to agree to that, right? It could be a version of that, or it could be a different version. It could be a version where people are working together and creating a new model and a new version and a new vision of what, but it'll be very nascent, okay? It'll be very nascent. It will be new, young, fresh. I'm going to go ahead here since we're kind of, when Saturn moves into the sign of Pisces, that's going to be in 2023. 2023, Saturn moves into the sign of Pisces. And whenever Saturn shows up and begins to conjunct Neptune, it's usually a sign of socialism or communism. Socialism begins to formulate. So we're moving into a time with that Saturn-Neptune conjunction where there will be some kind of communitarian or kind of socialistic value or reality that we're going to have to deal with. That's just the way the chart's going to unfold. From cycles in time, that's what's happened. We've seen this again and again and again when Saturn and Neptune conjoin. How long that lasts, we'll see. The real shocking period is in 2025. 2025 is when things begin to really, really shift. That's when Pluto goes into Aquarius. Yep. And in 2025, Neptune begins to move into the sign of Aries. And Uranus is in Gemini. And they're all in planets that are not grounded. Uranus and Gemini, that's air, that's electricity, that's technology. Neptune and Aries, that's like water and fire. It's very volcanic in a lot of ways. And there's also, to me, when I look at Neptune and Aries, there's a lot of wounding with Neptune and Aries. It's a lot of wounding. There's a potential for trauma to be addressed during that time, but it's not very grounded. And then Pluto and Aquarius is air. So those outer planets, which determine culture in a lot of ways, they're not grounded at all. Even Saturn at that time will be in the sign of Aries. So really what we're looking at is this period between 2025 and 2028. And that is, in my estimation, that is the most unstable period during this time. between 2025 and 2028. In 2028, things shift. Saturn moves into Taurus, and we're beginning to get grounded again. And in 2028, we begin to hit new land. So something shifts in 2028. Uranus will then move into the sign from 2025, right around 2032, moves into Cancer after that. So we have new land, new values, new technologies. To me, that's the 2028 is the beginning of the first turning. That is the new spring. Okay. Now, just because, I've brought up some things that are kind of intense, it doesn't mean that ultimately it is the end of our world. Our world will continue to evolve. You'll evolve. You'll grow. You'll grow spiritually like nobody's business. Because, what we're looking at, if we look at the deconstruction, and we are in a deconstruction phase, a deconstruction of the physical world, right, and it's inverting, then what's happening with the non-physical world, the ethereal world, or your relationship with your spirit, it has the potential to go in the other direction. So we've all been called to be here during this time. You're here. You're here. And you're going to witness things that no other era or no other epic in history or people in history have ever seen before. Ever. Think of all these social movements all sort of compressing into one super collider of events, really kind of at the end of time. Because Capricorn rules time. And when you look at the South Node, has anybody had like really weird experiences with time recently? Like you just feel like there's no time in a day? Like you wake up and then you go to bed? How many people are feeling things like that? That's the South Node in Capricorn because time.
No life.
No life.
Or you don't know what day it is.
Well, we're entering into the end of time. And when we come out of this period, it will be a different time or a new time. We'll have a different relationship. Yeah, new beginning.
That's what we need.
So you're here in a time of planetary, spiritual crisis and growth. And these eclipses are triggers and gateways to the new potentiality. Right? Well, just out of show of hands, who on some level is experiencing some kind of crisis and growth in their life right now? Okay, the majority of the room. The rest of you, you're holding space for us. Thank you for that. You'll have your turn. Had it. Good for you. I would say, 90% of the room raise their hands, right? And it's happening for a reason, because we're clearing things up. We're getting through these final phases of, I'm not a big karma guy, but that's kind of where we are. Contracts and reckonings. And that's all Saturn, Pluto, Capricorn related. Time. Time. Saturn, Capricorn, and Saturn specifically is Chronos. It's Chronos. It's also time. And Chronos is killed by Uranus, which is the beginning of a new time. So don't freak out. It's all good. Just do what you do. Keep living your lives, right? Face your crises the best that you can. Get through them with integrity. Tell the truth. We're in a big truth time right now with Sagittarius. Be truthful to yourself. Can't lie now. Can't do it. You lie to yourself, you lie to other people, it's going to come back on you. So do your best. And try to do your best also with other people. We don't always agree. Like I can disagree with a lot of people. But I try to, keep it cool. And like, okay, you've got your thing, I got my thing. And at a time where everything's polarized, giving people outs or saving face can lubricate the social mechanism. And you don't know how that's going to affect other people. You know, you just don't know how. If you say thank you instead of fuck you, it has a very different effect.
Yeah.
And that person then moves on in a very different kind of reality. And it's not easy because we're being triggered all the time now, for the most part. Whether it's our family, our finances, our health, combination of all of the above. Right? But, you know, in my worldview, God runs through everything. In each and every one of us. If you tap into that, stay close to that source and true to that source, and you're honest with that source, you'll be fine. You'll be protected. And especially if you're humble enough to admit that you're wrong and don't know everything. And I just showed you something. I don't know everything. But I just showed you what I believe, how I can interpret what I'm seeing. I've been doing this for a while. So it's just based on my skill set, but I don't know everything. You know, you can walk out of this room and say, okay, well, that was cool, but I'm gonna take what I can. I'm gonna live my own life, right? But if I can give you something just to take away, don't be afraid, don't run fear. But we are in a time of deconstruction and big change, and it's not going to end next week, next month, or next year.
So it's the paradigm shift.
It is a paradigm shift. What we're dealing with is a very interesting kind of tug of war between two forces that want to determine kind of this next chapter and this next epoch.
So I totally agree with you when you say, you know, stay in track with what sounds like you're saying, stay in your heart and stay in love. Act out of that as opposed to acting out of fear and hate, because if you stay in line with the love, then you're going to stay on track with your alignment with Source, which is where there is no time.
That's right. That's right. The key component with that also is truth.
Yeah, and
Right.
that is true.
Truth and
Right.
love. Because if this is one of the big debates on some level, like there's this idea that everything is fine and everything is good and we just love everything, right? And then there's a time and a place in the school for that. And then there's another kind of school of thought which is like, yeah, that's really great, but you know, I'm really not into children's organs being harvested and a whole other group of people that are doing this in order to be immortal, right? I mean, so there's this really interesting dance between calling things out when we need to call them out, because what happens when we don't call things out? The people who perpetrate the game continue to be the perpetrators, and we enable them. And so we have to be able to speak truth to power, but we also have to do it in a way where it is kind of loving, right? And be right there and be centered. You know, to be a laser beam. And there is a way that as individuals, I went through an experience recently where somebody did something and it really pissed me off. And I went through all my trips, right? That fucker doesn't respect me. You know, right? Went through all this in my head. And then I was like, okay, back off. Find a way in which to share, right, that I wasn't happy with something. And I found the language. I found the code. And when I found the code, he opened up. And you realize that, oh man, I didn't realize what was going on, and it was a revelation for this person. And we got closer, right? So you can go through something, you can be triggered, and you do need to speak truth to power. You just have to find the right way to get there. And it can be done. It can be done. And it can be done without sacrificing your point of view. And I'll wrap this up really quickly because I know you guys are probably tired and cold. But one of the things that, and controversial statement, but one of the things that I thought that Donald Trump did more than anything was that he shattered the glass on politically correct thought. And for me, I'd always kind of been there, lived there, done that. And it was like, wow, I don't have to think that way, or I can think that way and talk to that or speak to that. Now, what happened was you had a lot of people that had been bottled up for a very long time. People telling them what to think, what to do, what to eat. And all of a sudden, this guy comes around and just, shatters it. And those people are like, whoo! It's like, I want to start to talk. And they're not very well versed at that. So in the initial phases, it came out very awkward because their tongues were being untied. But it's an important process because when we have these agencies or these groups or these memes that are going to try to instruct us as to how to think, how to feel, how to speak, we're not thinking for or speaking for ourselves. We're taking that in and we're allowing that to determine our thoughts and our interactions with other people. And it's synthetic. It is not real. It comes from an ideological place that's superimposed on our own beliefs or our own heart and soul. And so thank him for that. You can think whatever you think of him, but smash the window of political correctness and untie our tongues. It's up to us from this point forward to be responsible with our tongues and to find the language with which we can articulate the things that we do not agree with or the things that we want to affirm and decree as being connected to us as truth and integrity in our own lives. So we're in the dance now. Isn't it great? It's really great. And it's very, very liberating. So I don't know where we are with YouTube. Let me just check with these people because we got a bunch of people here. What's going on? It's like, I want to start to talk. And they're not very well versed at that. So in the initial phases, it came out very awkward. Okay. Because their tongues were being untied. But people checking your FB settings. Because when we have a lot of my group is in here. All these people in my group. Agencies or these groups. Or these all my groups. That are going to Martin Luther King Day is on 2020. This is Jennifer. Jennifer's very interesting. We're taking that in. She was an actress. Our thoughts and our interactions with other people. Turned her back on it's synthetic. It is not real. It's just Robert's feet. It comes from an ideological place that's superimposed on our own beliefs or our own heart and soul. Okay. So okay. So they're off on another trip. Whatever you think of him. Okay. So I've got to stop. All right, I'm going to stop the YouTube. And I know why. It's because I plugged this in. It's up to us from this point forward to be responsible. We do this. To find the language. Okay, I'm not hearing myself all that much. Okay, let's do, where's Boxcast? There you go. Let's stop the stream.
What is 2020?
2020.